Alright, here we are on the RTX 3080. This is the 12GB version of the card, which does outperform not just due to memory, but it does perform a bit better than the 10GB version, so for comparisons do keep that in mind, although I do have it running at the stock settings. Now we're at about 60 FPS at 4K, and we're going to play around with all sorts of graphic settings. We're going to look at DLSS, we're going to look at TSR, we're going to look at ray tracing, but we're also going to look at some of the normal settings, because I've definitely dialed in one of the hardest hitting performance-wise graphic settings, which is the global illumination. SSGI has us just barely over 60 FPS. If we swap this out to SSAO, then, well, we're going to get a massive improvement to the frame rate. Notice that we're up to 86 FPS, up from about 62 or 63. Percentage-wise, that is an absolutely massive change. And you know, the game still looks pretty good with SSAO. So if you're looking for a big frame rate boost, that might be one that you want to play around with, but feel free to jump back and forth on this scene. I'm leaving it without moving the camera, so you can jump back and forth and compare. Now, let's go ahead and play around with some other settings to test. So that's one of the big ones, but I'm going to leave it back up at the higher setting here, just to keep that in mind. Now, when we look at the subsurface scattering effects, so right now we are at 63, 62 FPS, right? And that's with it up at its high setting. So let's go ahead and turn that down to the low setting, and let's see if we get much performance or visual difference. Notice that I don't really see any performance difference between low and high using that setting. So in my opinion, you may as well, at least on this graphics card, leave that one up at high. Although let's see what happens if we actually turn it off. Turning it off is only gaining us, what, we're up to 65 instead of about 62 or 63. So I don't see any reason not to leave the subsurface scattering all the way up at the high settings. So let's go ahead and jump back. And again, baseliner performance here, right around 62 and 63 FPS. And let's test out some of the other settings in this game. SSR, screen space reflections, up at cinematic, we're around that 62, 63 FPS. Let's go down to high. So down at high, we're now really, well, still at about 62 or 63 FPS. So at least in this scene, which definitely has some reflections, in the rainwater and everything, I'm not really seeing a difference between high and cinematic. Let's try out the medium setting, see if that has much performance impact. I'm still sitting here around 62 to 63 FPS, so I'm really not seeing a difference here. Now the game's not giving me a warning that it needs to have a restart or anything. Usually games will warn you if it requires a restart to actually adjust the setting. We definitely saw some other settings have a performance impact. Let's try going down to low for the screen space reflections. Once again, I'm sitting at basically the same performance. I don't know, guys. Maybe this one actually requires a restart, but it's, once again, not actually warning me. Let's try going all the way down to off. Okay, going down to off, we actually see a small performance difference, and I can visually absolutely see the difference. Feel free to jump around in the YouTube video to compare for yourself. So yeah, 65 FPS, we're only gaining a tiny bit of performance by turning off the screen space reflections. So I'm definitely gonna, at least on this GPU, keep that all the way up, because once again, there it is maxed out. The puddles look a whole heck of a lot better to me, and the performance is only a very minor change. So let's go ahead and play with some of the other settings. So we have shadow map quality. Currently it's at high. Let's drop it down to medium. Okay, the performance is now really bouncing between 63, 64. I mean, like, it's really maybe a 1 FPS difference. Not a whole lot of difference there. So I don't think that there's much performance to be saved by adjusting that shadow map quality down to medium. Let's see if going down to low does much. Yeah, I'm really not seeing a whole lot of a difference on that going down to low either. So once again, I think that I would like to keep the shadow map quality all the way up at high. And that looks pretty good. Okay, the next graphics setting that we have to play with is the level streaming distance. And this one has a bright red caution sign that changing this can use a large amount of memory. Now notice I'm on a 12 gigabyte card. If you look at the top left-hand side of the screen, it's currently allocating about 7 gigabytes. So let's move this up to 2. And, I mean, it went up a couple hundred megabytes. That doesn't seem to be that big of a difference, to be honest. I don't know if maybe I was running around if it would change much, but let's go ahead and check what happens if we turn it up even farther. So, level streaming distance, let's try going up to 3. Okay, we can watch the memory increased about another 100 megabytes if you look at that green memory in the top left corner. So far I'm nowhere near my 12 gigabyte limit on this graphics card, so I'm going to keep on going. We're going to go all the way up to 4. And yeah, we gained about another 100 megabytes of memory usage, or allocation. I don't know if it's usage. Looks like the actual system RAM went up a bit as well, but I'm on a 32 gigabyte system, so that does not seem to be an issue. And we're still under the 16 gigabytes that I would hope anybody with the 3080 has. But keep an eye on that. Now we also have texture streaming quality, which honestly, guys, I mean, we can try testing out, but I kind of think leaving it at auto probably works best. Let's try just bumping that all the way up to cinematic. I have a feeling that's what it was already doing, because I'm not noticing a huge difference. Okay, the rain in this game. Notice that our performance went down slightly, maybe 1 or 2 FPS, by having that rain kick on. Also, I wish the rain effects in this game looked a little bit better, but, you know, it's okay, I suppose. It's one of the, like, the graphics in this game overall I think look quite good, but I wish the rain effects were a bit better. I'm going to go ahead and leave texture streaming quality, I guess, all the way up to cinematic for the rest of our testing here. Alright, I think that's pretty much it other than the resolution scalers and the ray tracing effects. So let's go ahead and turn ray tracing on. With ray tracing on, we can now adjust, let's see, so I need to restart the application to test out ray tracing. So we'll actually go ahead and test that out separately from DLSS. So we'll test out DLSS first. So let's try out DLSS up to the quality setting. So notice by going to DLSS quality, our frame rate has now jumped all the way up to 100 FPS. And, you know, things still look very similar to the native resolution. Now, I want to test out the performance difference between DLSS and TSR, the temporal super resolution from the Unreal Engine. So let's go ahead and compare DLSS quality to TSR ultra quality and then quality. Let's go ahead and have a look. So the ultra quality I think has a higher native rendering resolution. So notice that we don't get quite the same performance boost, although it is still a pretty significant performance boost. And let's go ahead and turn down to the TSR quality setting, which I think would be also a 1440p render resolution, the same as DLSS quality. And it looks like the performance is very similar to DLSS quality, but just, what were we? We were a little over 100 with DLSS quality, and this is, you know, a little bit under 100. So DLSS quality does seem to give a slightly better performance boost, although it is pretty close. The nice thing about TSR is this is going to work on other graphics cards, not just your RTX cards. So if you're watching this video and you don't have an RTX card, that may be the way to go. Let's go ahead and try out TSR onto the balanced setting. And we're now up to around 111 FPS. Starting to see a bit more fuzzing to the image on my 4K screen. If you're not on a 4K screen, guys, I have no idea if I'll have time to edit in any zoom-ins here, so apologies if I didn't. But you can at least see the performance difference. Let's go ahead and look at DLSS at the, what were we at, balanced setting to compare. So once again, DLSS at the balanced setting is giving us a slightly better performance boost, probably because it can accelerate itself on the tensor cores, whereas TSR is not able to do that. Would be my guess. And also they're just going to be slightly different temporal upscaling algorithms. Alright, and let's go ahead and take DLSS all the way down to performance, where we're getting 132 FPS now, and the rain has stopped. So we're at 132, 133 FPS at the performance setting. And let's go ahead and compare to TSR performance. Image quality is pretty similar. The performance is also pretty similar at the performance mode. Okay, now I will take a quick look at FSR, but to be honest, on an RTX card, I think it makes sense to use DLSS or, maybe TSR for some reason, but FSR 1.0 is still a spatial upscaling algorithm. So, at the ultra quality setting, it actually does look fairly close to native if you're at a high resolution like 4K, and could be perfectly usable. However, I do think DLSS still does look a bit better, and then as we go down to the lower settings, it starts to be more noticeably not the native resolution. So we could go down to quality. See, here in the fine details compared to using the other algorithms at the quality setting, I'm definitely noticing a loss of detail, like in the taxi logo on that green taxi, the license plate in front of me, I cannot see the lettering at all. So with FSR, we're already starting to definitely noticeably lose some detail down at the quality setting, whereas if we do by comparison back to DLSS at the quality setting again, notice that I can actually read the license plate. I see 273-70, and it might be a 275, but the point is, I can actually read the license plate for the most part. And let's go to the native resolution. And at the native resolution, the license plate numbering looks slightly sharper. I guess it's about 27070, something along those lines. Alright guys, looks like to kick on ray tracing, we are going to require a restart, but we're going to go ahead and do that because I'd like to test out some ray tracing. Alright, so here is everything with ray tracing off. And that was at the native resolution and things maxed out and all that. Let's go ahead and turn on ray tracing to just absolutely everything. And leave it at the native resolution. It's probably going to take a minute to process that. There we go. Alright, so we're definitely dipping into the 30-something FPS range, so almost cutting our performance in half, not quite. Although you can definitely see some differences to the scene. Actually, it looks like that was still processing. Notice that it actually finished processing. We could see some visual changes continue to occur, and we're now down to 30 FPS. So it actually more than halved our performance. Although the scene certainly does look different with the ray tracing enabled. Now, if we want to leave the ray tracing absolutely maxed out, I think we absolutely would need DLSS, and so let's check how the quality setting does for us. Looks like quality doesn't quite get us to 60 FPS, but this would probably be playable at 50, up in the 50s, although we'll see if some scenes in the game maybe would have a bit more of a performance drop. And then we could drop over to the balanced preset, I think, might be what we'd want to go with. Yeah, to get more like the 60 FPS experience. And at 4K, DLSS balanced looks reasonably close to native. Although you can spot some minor differences. It certainly isn't native. Okay, so I think if you want to max out the ray tracing in the game, that's going to be what you want to do. But we're going to go back to native resolution. And now we're going to start playing with the various ray tracing effects and see which ones we could turn down and gain back the most performance. So if we wanted to just take a look at, for example, the culling distance of ray traced effects. So if we drop that down to medium, we go, we actually don't gain a whole lot. Giving it time to process, but we're basically still at around 30 FPS. So it's looking like that one's not going to do a whole heck of a lot for us. We could go down to low settings on the culling quality. And once again, that does not seem to be having much of a difference to our performance. So, at least in this scene, I'm gonna say I'm not gonna bother messing with that below the maximum setting. Let's try turning down the ray traced reflection quality to medium. Okay, that gains us a bit of performance back, so we went from like 31 up to 36. So I wonder if now going to DLSS quality would actually be more of a 60 FPS experience. And it looks like that might do it, guys. And here comes the rain. The rain comes to mess with our side-by-side image testing. Oh well. But it does look like the, just turning down the reflection quality to medium and then using DLSS quality can get you more of a 60 FPS experience with ray tracing enabled. Let's go ahead and drop the, let's see, let's actually go with DLSS off and drop the ray traced reflection quality down to low. Notice that that's getting us all the way back up to around 40, 41 FPS, which is pretty good. Not as good as I'd want to play on, but it does look like we're able to gain back a lot of the performance from those ray traced reflections by turning them down a bit. Let's turn the ray traced reflections off. So with the ray traced reflections off, we're up to around 50 FPS at the native resolution. Although, honestly, I like having the ray traced reflections on. I do think the puddles and things did look a lot more realistic with that ray traced reflection turned up. So we're going to put that back. So we're back to the maximum ray tracing settings. Once again, right here at about 29 to 30 FPS. And let's go ahead and play around with some more settings. So let's try the shadow quality. So dropping shadow quality to medium really has almost no change to the performance. As long as we already have, I think some of the other effects are already tracing those rays. So I think if you just did it in isolation with only shadows and had everything else off, that might change things. Shadows going down to low, again, also not really changing our performance here. So I think I have arrived at my optimized 4K ray tracing settings, and then I want to do some gameplay to see if I'm correct that this would be the way to go. So based on our testing here, I think taking the ray traced reflection quality down to medium, having all of the normal graphic settings absolutely maxed out, and running DLSS at quality, I think is going to give us the best place to make the performance compromise. Let's see if we can manage to hold 60 FPS. And I am on a controller. I'm trying out the PS5 controller here. Oh, it looks like I don't have any, what's it called? I don't have the things. I don't know what the buttons do. So it looks like we definitely are still dropping below 60 FPS with these settings now that we've actually entered combat. Now on a variable refresh rate screen, I still think that this may be a good way to go. So I'm not really feeling the dips too hard. So I think if you want to use ray tracing, that this still may be the way to go. I need more of the little, like, things. Is this a thing? I don't know what the buttons do. I forgot which button is melee attack. Oh, I died. Guys, I switched to a controller after having learned how to play the game on mouse and keyboard, because apparently this supports a lot of the PlayStation 5 controller stuff, you know? Anyway, like the adaptive triggers and whatnot. Alright guys, well I think that's it for my 4K ray tracing optimization video. You could obviously go a little bit more aggressive on the DLSS or turn things down a bit more, but I think if you want to max out the visual quality and you're on a variable refresh rate screen, dipping into the mid-50s didn't really feel that bad to me, and this allows us to keep almost everything almost all the way up. So I hope all of you have an excellent day.